My name is Gemma Coward and I manage the Homeless and Domestic Abuse Service at Colquhoun Borough Council. We're a statutory homeless service, and as part of that service we've seen an increase in victims of domestic abuse coming forward, and that they were homeless as a result of domestic abuse. We applied for the funding for an officer, and that officer would do the support the victim and hold their hand right the way through from that crisis stage to the intervention, and we would go from that sustainable support. Yeah. So before we got the funding, we're the statutory duty for homelessness, so we're a local authority, and we have people present as homeless with nowhere to go, with no roof over their head, but we also have people that present as threatened with homelessness. And within them cohorts we had a lot of victims presenting as from domestic abuse relationships. And what we found was that, yes, we give them accommodation, so we've got 10 units of temporary emergency accommodation, and we used to give them a set of keys for that property, and it was all based on the property. We would come and see you in a week's time, and that weekly visit would be about the property to make sure that it was maintained, to make sure that it was gas and electric on. We found that a lot of victims would go back to perpetrators because of that, and there was no real wraparound and there's no support to that victim and their families. So what we've done is we went to the CCF and asked for funding for an officer, so that officer could be that one-to-one intensive support right the way through, a basic handhold with that victim and their families to signpost them into different services to where they need. It's very person-centred, so it would go with kind of a three-stage approach. They would present as homeless as a result of domestic abuse, and we would do the risk assessment. We would do access to temporary accommodation, make sure they're safe, their safety is paramount. And 4 of our 10 units of special safety measures. So we have extra locks on the doors, we have blinds specifically so you can't see shadows behind them. We have CCTV on most, so they are really equipped to make that victim feel as safe as possible, and we want them to feel home from home. We don't use refuges, we don't use B&B, we always place them into a house or a flat that is fully equipped, ready to move into, with bedding, with towels, with food, everything that they need. And what also we found is that a lot of the victims were controlled most of their life. They don't have a bank account, they don't know how to pay a bill. My officer that the CCF funds does all of that and wraps that support around them and gives that intensive support, and there's no cliff edge to that support, so it will continue right the way through, going into temporary accommodation and beyond. And what we're here to do is trying to make that new property and build their life back up, that confidence when they move into the new property, and we'll build that support around them to make their life sustainable and prevent them going back to the perpetrator.
I left in January 2018. I didn't have any belongings on me at all. I had no money, I had nothing. I left with nothing. I went to the Copeland Centre. I'd seen an advert on TV. I was in a pretty bad state. I couldn't even say my own name. And then I met Gillian and Gemma from the domestic violence team. They took my story, they listened, they found me somewhere safe that night to stay in accommodation. But there was also my son that was included in that accommodation. He had suffered the same, he was 19, 20-year-old, 20. So there was my son with me as well. And then from going on to that, the next morning I got phone called, is there anything you need? We had food, we were given food, a food bank, which is very important as well. Toiletries, everything, because we had nothing. And then I had to meet with the police. Gillian was there to support me meeting with the police. Also to sign on to get benefits. It was a busy week, the first week. I went and signed on, something I'd never ever done. Never done anything like that at all. I didn't have control of my own bank account. I had a bank account, but I didn't have control of it. So that was another thing. We stopped him getting control of my bank account by going into the bank. Gillian came there with me. And then I needed to go, the next thing was go to the doctors, which I found very hard, because that was also his doctors and we kind of knew everybody there. So Gillian came there with me. Everywhere I went, Gillian came with me. Even leading up to going to court to get his convictions, Gillian was there for me. She didn't actually come to court with me, but she was there for me. Gillian's roles are quite important. I always say, if you've got to tell one person your story when you need something, and then you've got to go to another person for something else, you're repeating your story all the time. It's nice to have the one-to-one, and you've got that one-to-one person, and then you're not having to tell everybody, oh, what's happened, what do you need? Gillian knew what I needed. I stayed in a temporary accommodation. Then I went to another accommodation next to my family where they lived, my grandchildren and my son and my daughter-in-law. It wasn't very far away. Then I had to start bidding for houses, and I actually got a house round the corner from my son and my daughter-in-law and grandkids, which I never got to see my grandkids. I wasn't allowed to go and see my grandkids. I have 4 grandchildren and I wasn't allowed to go and see them. So I moved in this house. I got fire screen put at the windows, I got a fire bag at the front door, I got compost doors on so they're harder to break into. The main thing I use a lot, and I still use it 4 years later, is a safe room. The safe room is a thick fire door, and it's got multiple locks. It's got a lot of locks on there, it goes into the wall. When I get in that safe room, I know I'm safe. Without the safe room, I wouldn't feel safe. So, moving on from the accommodation, it's the fact that 4 years later, I have had to ring for help and support of Gemma and Gillian in the last 2 weeks because things have arose with him again. And like I say, with the doctors, I wasn't sleeping, so Gillian got me a doctor's appointment, which I've been trying for weeks just to get a simple telephone call. As for getting counselling, I found it hard going to tell my story to somebody else, and then going to that counselling again, and somebody else would ask you, and you're having to repeat yourself all the time. I mean, mine was horrific. I will admit my story is horrific. It really, really is. I mean, I meet other people that are going through domestic violence, and they'll say, ours is nothing compared to yours. Everybody's story is different. I would seek help. I would ask anybody to seek help. Help is there. There used to be a taboo where you used to have to leave your town where you lived. You had to go and live somewhere else in a refuge. It isn't like that anymore. It really is not like that anymore. It takes a bit to get used to it, but once you know that freedom's there and you're not going to have to suffer no more, the freedom is beautiful. Speaking from my own experience, the freedom is brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. I've moved on so much, especially in the last year. I've got a new partner. He treats me well. He knows everything that's gone on, and the love and support that I get from him is amazing. Because people always say to me, do you ever move on? I think it's a different time scale for everybody else. If you want to move on, if you're looking for another relationship, that's fine. Mine came out of nowhere. Mine came out of having the same interests. I met 2 friends with the same interests. So you can move on. I meet a lot of people that say, oh, it's just me and the kids now. And I say, but it won't always be just you and the kids. But how did you meet other people? I left all the friends I had. I never went back to them friends. I've got new friends. I've got a lot of new friends. They all know my situation, and I'm never judged. I'm never judged anymore. I used to get judged. Oh, that was that lady that was in the paper. Now they'll say, that's that brave lady that was in the paper and told her story. You've got to tell your story. You've got to get your story out there. Because if not, you're just going to suffer longer. Until I put my story in the paper, I could categorically say, I never got over it. But once I put it in the newspaper and made everybody aware of why it went on so long, I think the support I got of people to understand. A lot of people say, I left because of your story. I left my situation because I read your story. And that's not just in Copeland. I get it from all over the country. So it's a good thing.
In terms of future provision, it would be a funding bid, I would think, coming in from the West Cumbria Domestic Abuse Partnership. And one thing that we need is like a one-stop shop. We need somebody to take in a referral from a victim to prevent that big victim telling their story to 12 different organisations and partners time and time again. And because at the minute that's what they do, and without that support worker kind of going with them and being, you know, holding their hand through that process, it's a real time consuming process. I'm telling my story again. Why can't that organisation talk to that organisation? And I think, you know, in the future, that's where I would like to see Cumbria go in terms of a one-stop shop for domestic abuse. Your referral goes into one organisation that deals with it and speaks to all the other organisations and brings everybody in to a partnership based on the victim in the middle.
Cool.
My officer goes to the multi-agency risk assessment conference every week, and there's about 15 cases every week discussed, and that is high risk clients only. So when a victim presents to my officer, they would do a risk assessment in that crisis phase based on that incident or incidents. And if they score any more than 14, they are pushed through to the multi-agency risk assessment conference with the police chair. And anything under that would be dealt with through victim support. So them statistics are quite high, but not every victim is homeless as a result of domestic abuse. They won't come forward. They don't want to leave their home. The children's settled. There's a stigma around, we'll pull them away from the school, we'll pull them away from the support network. Whereas Copeland pride themselves on, we will listen to that victim, we'll listen to the voice of the victim and the children, we will keep you with where your support network is if it's safe to do so. So I think our figures are totally different to the police's figures, for example. And victim support, they would have a lot more higher volume of victims coming forward because we're primarily dealing with the statutory homelessness cases.